Hi everyone, it's Rachel Rothstein, author of the Heaven Sent series. My new book, Atonement, is out now. You can go check it out on Amazon or on my website, jlrothstein.com. I am so excited. Today I am meeting and chatting with fellow indie author Rachel Hobbs. So Rachel, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
This is going to be great. I'm very excited. I bought the book, your book, Shadow Stained. I am reading it now. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about the book?
Shadow Stained is an adult dark fantasy. It revolves around the Stone of Immortality, the two demon powerhouses competing for the stone, and Ruby, who is human and stuck in the middle. It's the first
as all of our humanness is, right? We're always stuck in the middle between this whole world of evil, good versus evil, and heaven and hell. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, obviously, as writing about heaven and hell myself. And I love this premise, and the whole name of the stone and everything about it is just very alluring. So I'm very excited to read and chat about that, and hopefully possibly maybe even have you back on the show, and we'll do a deep dive into the book itself and where it goes from there. But for now, let's jump into your 3 questions. So just to remind the audience who might be watching, Rachel sent me the questions but not the answers, so I get to hear all the answers along with the audience. So your first question was about being a writer and what your favorite thing is about being a writer.
Yeah, it's hard to pick just one favorite thing about being a writer, but I think the things that come to mind, I don't know about you, but I was always the weird kid at school, and that was fine. But then I jumped into the writing community, and everyone's weird here. It's perfectly normal, and that's amazing.
Well, how else do we world build if we're not a little weird inside, right? We got to have those crazy imaginations.
Yeah, I think being a writer is all about embracing that weirdness. But I think my favorite thing about being a writer is just being able to empty my head of all the rubbish and the negativity swirling around, and then pouring it out onto the page and turning it into something positive. Writing started off as therapy for me. And it was a way of collecting my thoughts, and slowly over time it just became shadow stained.
That's fascinating. So do you feel like you always wrote, that like even going back into school and high school and whatnot, were you always a writer, do you feel?
Yeah, creative writing was always my favorite subject at school. It's the thing that I most look forward to. And yeah, I suppose.
Always thinking about yourself as a writer. Yeah, it's fascinating. I've had that question asked to so many different authors, and I think as many different authors as I've posed it to have had different answers. But I think it all sort of trends in the same way. There's a lot of thoughts, there's a lot of things coming in and coming at you, and how are you dealing with those, whether it's that you feel compelled to put them on paper, or that it's sort of like you said, therapy to put them on paper. So that is fascinating. So would you say in your writing that there's little pieces of you then in that writing because of that?
Definitely, yeah. I think, I kind of wrote myself out of a few black holes when I was a teenager.
Yep.
And it's reflected in Shadow Stained. It's a book about demons, and I suppose Tribex in particular is an amalgamation of a few bad experiences and things that I was able to just kind of purge. But yes, it's just turned into something really positive, and looking back, everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to.
Yeah. That all sort of led you to have that wisdom to be able to write this particular story that only you could write. And I think that that's something that harkens back to a lot of writers out there that will hear that will immediately be able to relate to what you're talking about. So your second question relates to more process in beginning the process of writing, so you work. So how do you balance working and then being a writer?
I work full time, so it's difficult to slot writing in sometimes, but I sometimes wake up at 6 o'clock, do an hour's writing, and then I'll go on to work, or I'll come home and I'll unwind by doing a bit of writing.
Yeah.
But it's just, I really take advantage of the weekends. I don't work at the weekend, so that's my writing time. And I block that off, and I don't socialize ever.
You're like, I don't have time to talk to you. I need to get this out of my head and get it onto paper. It's interesting. I work full time myself, and one of the things I find hardest is breaking that connection, especially now during COVID, where we're all at home. Like, I'm working at home, so now I'm home the whole entire time, and it's like, okay, it's 5 o'clock. If I want to get an hour of writing in, okay, shut that part of your brain off that had to do with work, and now go into this creative space in order to create the story. So it's definitely a challenge, maybe even more so now than it was before. I don't know if you're finding something similar.
Yes, I have had more time on my hands than I've had in a long time recently, and I always assumed that if I did have lots of time, I would be super productive and I'd get lots done. But it's actually, with all this time, it's been really hard to just sit down and focus,
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that work-life balance helps with the writing.
Yeah, I think, for me in particular, so I work in business, so I'm dealing with numbers all day, and that's a completely different part of my brain. And then would normally have the ride home. It's like, okay, work ended, I'm leaving an office space, I'm getting into my car, I'm driving home. Okay, you're sort of decompressing through that whole process without even realizing it. And then you could start thinking about what you're going to do when you get home. And it's like, okay, I'll have some dinner, and then I'm going to go into my creative space mode. And now it's like, you don't have that. You don't have sort of that decompression moment that you would normally take while you were leaving an office, or if you're a waitress leaving the restaurant, or wherever it is you do, if you're a nurse leaving the hospital, you don't have sort of that forced mental break. And like you, I thought the same thing. I thought all this time is going to be all filled with writing, and it's been so challenging. And I'm finding that a lot of people are finding that same thing. So maybe we'll have to come up with new and creative ways to make that break while we're home. So that'll be very interesting. So as part of your process, and I've asked this question to a lot of authors as well, is whether or not you outline before writing, or whether or not you just sit down and you write.
Yeah, in a way. I don't like to have everything detailed out. So I like to have the bare bones outline. Point A, point B, point C, like a map. I want the basic locations. I don't want the details. That's all part of the fun, the discovery process.
Yeah. The magic, right? When you're sitting down and you start typing, and all of a sudden you just write, it comes to you and you just write it. You don't want someone to have told you that this, and this needs to happen in that outline.
Yes. And I think sometimes I do have an outline in mind, but my characters have a different idea. They often just go their own way. And then I have to either rein them back in, or say, yep, no, that one's better.
And do you do that part of it, like reining them back in? Do you do that chapter by chapter, like the next time you go to write, you fix it? Or do you worry about that sort of later, like after it's all out?
Well, I have to admit I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and it's not necessarily a good thing, but I will write a chapter, and then I'll go back and I'll spend a while tweaking it and fiddling it when I should be moving on, But yeah, I suppose I do go back and fiddle quite a lot.
And do you feel like you need to do that in order to then move forward? Like, you wouldn't be able to move forward with the next chapter without doing sort of that revised edit or revised piece of the
it takes me a while to get through a draft, but by the time I've played with it so much, it's probably the equivalent of 2 drafts.
You are making more work for yourself, Rachel.
Oh yes, I know. I'm
Well,
writing my second book now. It's the sequel to Shadow Stained, and hopefully this process is a bit more streamlined. I have more of an idea of what I'm doing this time. So
is that
that's
kind of how you felt looking back on it now, that you sort of just went with your gut on the first book and now it's like, okay, now I've learned, so I get a general sense of what I should be doing?
yes. The process for Shadow Stained was very messy. I started writing it when I was 16. I'm now 30, so I've
It's
had
taken a little bit of time. That's all. Just a little bit of time to get to market.
I picked it up and put it down so much. I had to start it again so many times because I'd improved so much over the course of the years. It was worth waiting for. I think some books can only be told when you have the experience to tell them.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, especially thinking about the fact that you were 16, right? You had all these great creative ideas, probably, but did they really marry up with the wisdom that comes from experience that you're probably reading in the book today? So probably not. So that was probably a good idea, but you're not the only one. How many people have shelved work, right? Like that, how many people have buried a story or not finished it or got halfway and started somewhere else? So I think the stories have a way of happening when they're supposed to happen. Like they sort of call to you and you know when it's the right time to write that or finish that or produce that or, publish it even. And for us, both of us making that decision to self-publish. And we were chit-chatting a little bit before we hit the record button here, and you were saying how you had queried it and then finally made the decision to publish it. I did the same thing. I queried Heaven Sent. It's a personal decision, I think, as to when you make that decision to cut off the query and say, I'm just going to go out to the self-publishing world. Did you feel that way as well? It was just sort of a gut instinct, like I'm ready, I'm just going to put it out.
Yes, I suppose my initial dream was to have it traditionally published, but I queried for almost a year. I gave it my best shot, and it wasn't meant to be. So at the point where it just became soul sucking, I drew a line under it and thought, yep, I'm going to do it myself.
Well, there's good and bad things. I mean, I've talked to a lot of authors who have done the same thing and felt like, now being a self-publisher, you have to wear all the hats. So you're self-promoting, you're thinking about marketing, you're doing advertising, you're here with me doing this interview, talking about this and promoting in this way, but you're also writing and you're also scheduling for the next book. There is a lot to be said for having to be thrown into the deep end of the pool, right? And having to be forced to learn this and maybe appreciate it. Certainly doesn't mean that you can't go traditional publication with another book in the future or the second book or some different book altogether than what you're writing. So I know you're writing the second book, and this is a trilogy, what you're writing, or just 2 books?
No, there's actually 4. So Shadow Stained is the first of 4.
Nice.
It
So
was
when we
a trilogy, but you know how these things kind of expand.
well, you have more to tell. The world is very vast. The world that you've created is very big, so there's a lot more to tell. So obviously what's next for you has to do with the second book. When do you think that will be published?
Ooh, middle of next year, fingers crossed.
Nice. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. This has been fantastic. Little bits of wisdom for everybody who's out there who's watching, especially if they haven't published their work yet. So I'm very appreciative of this. Where can people find Shadow Stained?
Let's see, Shadow Stained.
There it is. There's the cover.
Yes. Online everywhere where books are sold. I'm actually hosting a giveaway at the moment for until the end of this week. You can go on to my Twitter and click on the link to be within the chance of winning a paperback copy.
Excellent.
My handle is Hobbs Author.
Excellent. That is so fantastic. I hope everybody goes out, checks out the book, buys lots of books, at least enters in to get a free book. I can't thank you enough for coming on. This was fantastic. And I hope everyone watching enjoyed it also. So thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you for having me.